The purpose of this video is to answer the question, when did the pandemic start for purposes of these mortgage forbearance transition plans? If you are a subscriber to my page, welcome back. If not, make sure you subscribe, like the video below. If you just want to share your story or have a quick question, I always try to respond to everybody as quickly as possible. So this is a video that applies to those of you out there who have been on one of these COVID forbearance plans and now you want to transition off of them. What's important to understand is when the banks interpret the start date of your COVID hardship. So what has ended up happening is many people across America received these COVID forbearance plans. So when the pandemic hit and people began to have financial hardships, as you know, lenders put people on these forbearance plans, meaning these agreements where people were allowed to not make mortgage payments without facing foreclosure. What's ended up happening and what I'm seeing pop up now as a problem is many people who were what the lenders call pre-COVID hardship people were given a forbearance plan. And so if you're trying to transition off of one, you want to make sure you know whether you were a pre-COVID person or a COVID person. And so all of these new guidelines around how to help borrowers transition off of these plans, one of the requirements for these plans is that you have a COVID-related hardship. So if you're trying for a loan modification or a partial claim or a payment deferral, lenders want to make sure that you are actually a person whose hardship is related to COVID. And the big date that must be kind of like complied with is March 1st, 2020. So what that means is if you were defaulted from March 1st, 2020 forward, and you received one of these COVID forbearance plans, you will be viewed by your lender as somebody who has a COVID-related hardship, which is good. What that means is most of the available options, depending on who your investor is, most of the available options for transitioning off of the COVID forbearance plans will be available to you. So what you have to do is kind of pull your payment history and figure out, when did you default? If you defaulted March 1st, 2020 or later, and you got one of these COVID forbearances and you have one of the government investors that are discussed on other places on this page, you will likely be able to take advantage of the COVID protections. Now, here's the crazy thing that's been going on. If you defaulted prior to March 1st, 2020, you are not viewed by the lender as somebody who has a COVID-related hardship. But what's crazy is that you still might have received one of these COVID forbearance plans, right? So lenders handed out COVID forbearance plans to people who were in default prior to COVID. Now, the way that that impacts you is now that you're trying to transition off of your COVID forbearance plan. For those of you who received a plan but defaulted prior to March 1st, 2020, you might not be eligible for some of the COVID protection transition plans. So you kind of have to determine when your default date was. Now, if you are a pre-COVID default person, if you defaulted before March 1st, 2020, that does not mean that there are no loss mitigation options available to you. You still have the ability to apply for a loan modification, ask the bank for a repayment plan, but you're not going to receive kind of some of these streamlined protections. You likely will still have to submit a document package, and you likely will only be able to be reviewed for kind of the standard loss mitigation procedures that the banks were offering prior to COVID. So if you're somebody who received a COVID forbearance, what you need to understand is that does not automatically mean that you're eligible for the protections. You have to check your default date, and your default date must be March 1st, 2020 or later in order to receive some of the most recent protections announced. If you have questions about individually kind of like what you're eligible for and what the different options are, you should figure out who your investor is and then watch the videos on this page that will kind of walk through what the different options are if you're trying to transition off of the plan. Good luck.